All right, we are back with our second to last talk of the day. So this next talk is with Ed Kirk, the CEO and co-founder of Memrise. He is an author, a speaker, and an expert on memory and experiential learning. The title of Ed's talk is Online Parties, Virtual Worlds, and Language Immersion. He will draw from experiments in avant-garde online parties and in Memrise's R&D team to share a vision for how the future of language learning can have some of the vibrancy, sociality, and richness of an immersive adventure in a foreign land. So I will go ahead and leave it to you, and I'll be back in about 20 minutes.
Thank you so much, Megan. Right, hopefully you can get a sense of, yep, I'm going to take it on trust that you can see what I'm doing. Right, so online parties, virtual worlds, and language immersion. And the question here is, can technology improve on non-tech in language learning? So I'm Ed Kirk, I'm the CEO of Memrise. You can follow me on Twitter here at Ted Cook, and ed@memrise.com for email if you want to send me any thoughts. So a quick bit of background. We founded Memrise in 2010, and we had 3 co-founders with kind of interestingly different backgrounds, fundamentally in the relationship between memory and language learning. So I greatly enjoyed the last talk. And so, my background was I was a memory champion. I competed for many years at the World Memory Championship. I kind of taught myself to do things like, memorize like 1,000 words in a day or 16 decks of cards in an hour. My co-founder, Greg, had a neuroscience PhD at Princeton, studying the kind of the nature of memory. And our third co-founder, Ben, taught himself Chinese by immersing himself in China following crashing. And so it's a kind of interesting combination of different attitudes towards memory. And when we first built the system, we did all of the things which Gabriel was just talking about. So we built a really advanced space repetition system. We had lots of mnemonics and different other ways to get people to process information deeply. We had a fundamental integration of the testing effect, which Gabriel was just describing, which is that when you recall something, that consolidates it more than if it's just shown to you again. And we gradually amped it up to sort of the rate at which you could kind of learn by 100 words per hour by integrating these techniques. And this was actually back in 2009 in Antwerp, and I was living there just before we kind of officially began the company, and I was learning Flemish, and I learned about 5,000 words over the course of not very long in the very first early prototype of Memrise. And then one day I hired a guy to come and help me move a sofa up some stairs. And this is kind of an illustration of that. And he came along with his friend, and what was so interesting was that the friend, they turned up in the morning, and the friend was like being a bit grumpy. And the guy said, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry about him. He's always really grouchy in the mornings." And there was something about the perfection of his idiomatic English, which made me ask, like, how on earth did you learn to speak so well? Because my Flemish, despite learning 5,000 words with, arguably the most advanced learning system yet conceived, was just nowhere near at the same level. So, and the guy basically explained that he'd learned it all playing Call of Duty. And so, despite the fact that, even back in the day, we created this amazing system which integrated all the principles of memory, this guy actually, in a way, had a better language learning experience just learning Call of Duty. And it's quite interesting. And so, why is it that like a kind of a 5x learning solution, which, extracts all the juice you can possibly get out of a brain, is actually in some respects inferior to something which doesn't even try and teach you a language, which is just an immersive computer game? So I began talking to him about it, and and the obvious things came up. It was about speaking. It was about because you plot your missions with other people. It's that you're speaking language in context, that you make friends, that you have memorable experiences, that you actually have fun. You're coming there for the fun, and there's a loss of sense of time. And so these are the kind of characteristics of immersive computer games, which turn out, even by accident, to teach you how to speak a language very, very powerfully. And this really got me thinking, and it kind of relates to a fundamental aspect of memory, which was actually, someone was dissing Duolingo earlier, saying, all you get good at when you learn Duolingo is being good at Duolingo. And it's kind of true that the response environment of an app is very difficult from the response environment of the real world. So one of the things that Memrise we did is we tried to create in the app a situation by which the response environment, namely the situation which prompts you to produce some language, actually corresponds to the real world. And to do that, we went on a double-decker bus tour around Europe. And this is a video which sort of narrates that journey. And I think I might actually skip making you watch this, because I'm unclear whether Hopin can deal with shared sound. But basically, in a basic way, this video makes the argument that, like, being immersed in the world is much superior to being in a boring language class. And it talks about our epic road trip around Europe and how the style, personality, and the content of the streets in the world of Europe made for much better language learning material than some boring bit of flashcardy vocab stuff. And this is evolved in time into our kind of overall philosophy of learning at Memrise, which is, we teach people stuff in the basic sense of memorizing words and phrases extremely fast. We get them to immerse in that kind of language which is expressed in the real world, and then we get people communicating and using that language. And I think we do a decent job, and we've had some success. We've had 50 million learners learning more than 1 billion words. We were kind of App of the Year with Google Play in 2017, and we've done some cool stuff in machine learning. For example, we were featured at WWDC with our kind of recognize objects in a kind of immersive way to know what they mean. But even though, by the standards of apps, we're pretty cool, a month on Memrise is still a long way short of a month in, for example, Bogota. Everyone knows that, if you actually go and immerse in a place, you'll learn the language, and to an idiomatic level, which can't be achieved with an app. And you do things which are great, like you make friends, you have memorable experiences, you have actual fun in the embodied world related sense, and you kind of lose your sense of time. You lose your sense that you're even studying. And so, even despite all that we throw into Memrise, immense amounts of intellectual and creative power, we're still way short of like the non-technological solution. This is true certainly of all other apps in the industry. It's like, despite our best efforts, it's still much better immersing in a place that speaks the language, which is kind of an embarrassing and disappointing fact, having given 10 years of my life to trying to invent incredible language learning tech. And so I want to talk about my adventures in the last year during lockdown, and how by accident, I've kind of happened back onto perhaps that sort of original insight from 2009 about the value of immersion in virtual worlds. And so when lockdown happened, I had rather stupidly not really. I was a keen student of the pandemic, and I'd made predictions inside the company, and we sorted everything out really early, etc. But I completely forgot to actually sort out my own personal situation. So I just ended up in by myself in a flat in London for the course of the lockdown, which is obviously super boring. And I'm quite a gregarious person. And I was reminded of the fact that the thing I was going to miss the most in lockdown, it was immediately obvious that was going to be parties. I love parties. I think of parties as the highest form of human experience, the best thing people can do with their time. And actually, I've studied parties quite a lot. And, Emil Durkheim, for example, basically conceives of parties as the original virtual reality. And so this is a quote about parties. Everything is just as though we were really transported to a special world, entirely different from the one where he ordinarily lives, and into an environment with exceptionally intense forces that take hold of him and metamorphose him. Forgive the spelling error. And really, if we look at parties, they are the most powerful known engines of meaningful experience. More new memories, romances, career changes, friendships, epiphanies, intellectual collaborations, and other fateful encounters. I'm going to come back to the concept of a fateful encounter happen per hour at parties than during any other human activity. And so I organized an online party, and this was loosely based on Tarkovsky's film The Stalker, where there's a bunch of people going through a twilight Russian wilderness looking for a place of the zone, and the zone is a place where your deepest desires come through. And the concept of the party was that people would party their way to the most real place in the lockdown. And so we had bouncers, so we had virtual bouncers, and we greeted people at the door with a champagne reception, and everyone was turned away at the door if they weren't wearing costumes. We even had places like toilets, the places you go and sort of just chill out at a party away from the rest of it. And there's lots of dance and so on. One of the highlights actually was a mixed reality hot tub, where in order to be in this room, you had to actually get into your bath and pretend you're in a hot tub, and that was very compelling. And when we did the survey afterwards, we asked people, like, how real was the party? And it turned out that people thought the party was exceptionally real. And this kind of surprised us. It was sort of a joke question, and we kind of followed up and we kind of interviewed people. Well, why was the party so real? And people named these kinds of things: spatial context, having a sense of where they were in space; agency, interactivity, participation, shared narrative. These are the things which are interestingly things which are kind of missing from this online events platform. These are the kind of the things which make things feel real rather than like an online thing. And then what were the consequences of that? Well, people made friends, they had memorable experiences, they had actual fun, and they lost their sense of time. And if we recall from earlier, these were the kinds of characteristics which people described in immersive computer games that made them such a good environment for language learning. So anyway, we began to gradually make more and more elaborate online parties, and this was just a sort of side thing. So this was a party inside a human body, this was a party on the moon, and we came in contact with the people who run and then we kind of began to build a tool. So we had this kind of thing where you could have a map, and you could click on the rooms on the map, and you'd have different templates for these rooms. You can have a virtual jazz bar or an auditorium, this kind of thing. And we wound up supporting kind of Burning Man. He had like an on-learned line kind of version of Burning Man, which is actually the biggest online party of all time. And this was the kind of experience we built, which was kind of a bit like Burning Man, with lots of camps, and you click inside them and things would be happening. There were like 200 camps, thousands of live performance, and it was co-created by its participants, a bit like a city, because that's what Burning Man is. It's a virtual city created once a year. And some of the camps are really cool. You go inside and there'd be these kind of immersive things, and then you click into these spaces, and then you'd be maybe in a Zoom call, maybe in an actual embedded in-browser video experience. But this all created sort of spatial and emotional context. And all kinds of madness took place at this thing. There's a real kind of art form to online party, which I won't go into too much, but like it certainly involves, lots of liberal use of snap lenses, crazy visual effects, but loads and loads of participation, shared narrative, and co-creation. Those are kind of the key things. This is me in an absolutely absurd situation, swimming around in the sea. And although I wasn't technically swimming, the experience was actually much closer to swimming than you would ever imagine was possible because of the participative attitude towards the imaginative world. And there were other things characteristics of the real world. We had a sense of night and dark, so this is a sense of dark. And then when the man burned, we had a little sort of auditorium space, and everyone could see a real world man burn, but also get the sense of each other in the thing. And this is kind of something which cities do very well. They have these kind of coming togethers, events basically, where people come and share in an experience. And the final thing we had, which I wanted to talk about, was we could bump into people and chat. And so you had these little icons, and you'd move around the virtual playa, and you could be on a bike or you could be walking. And this is me on my bike, And I've been at the party for about 7 days non-stop. I took a week off work, and then this was and I bumped into someone on the playa on the big desert thing, and I kind of clicked on them and I said, "Oh, hey, do you want to go and join a chat?" And so I ended up talking to this young lady called Tiffany, and I was dressed as Captain Cook throughout the whole thing. That was my kind of persona. And there was a kind of just a fateful encounter, because Tiffany turned out to be, an American lady who's been living in Colombia, and for many years she'd been running a language exchange in Bogota called Gringo Tuesdays, which is by all accounts like the most fun language exchange the world has ever had. Epic building, 500 people, tables for all the languages, all working up to a big party at the end. Basically full of the joy and magnificence of actually life itself, rather than some dry interactive app. And anyway, so she introduced me to her parties, and they had a kind of online version, which is pretty good, involving, creative use of breakout rooms and different spaces. And I found it super inspiring, met loads of cool people from Colombia. And so we began, Memrise, And we were tempted as some other, apps are to have some sort of online classes thing. But, classes are cool, but they're nowhere near as cool as parties. And so we began kind of organizing some online parties. And again, kind of using this basic tech. There are maps, you go inside spaces, you see where other people are, and you can immerse and connect with people. And this has given us a kind of a vision of something which could take place at some point in the future, and which we're kind of working towards in our way. But perhaps some of the other language apps here would think of kind of collaborating with us on what would basically be Utopia for language learners, a massive immersive world continuously populated with events and music and dance and cooking and all these things, where you can wander around, exchange, and basically have the same kind of immersive experience as my furniture mover did in Antwerp. And so that's kind of what we are trying to put together, kind of Utopia for language learners. I'll keep you updated, and that's it really. So that's my talk. Online parties, virtual worlds, and language immersion. Can technology improve on non-tech and language learning? I think this is the direction for it to try to do so, and that's my story and journey on that. So thank you, thank you very much.
That was amazing. I definitely would like to join one of your online parties. Couple of questions. So while we wait for some people to send us questions, so I'm just curious. So you guys are building out your own like virtual party platform then, or are you using other platforms?
Yeah, so I found that none of the existing virtual events platforms kind of had the level of party required. So just with some friends, actually, this wasn't directly connected with Memrise. I kind of built my own in order to create those kinds of, because it's difficult to understate how important agency is in these kinds of experiences. And so it's called, it's called Sparkle. Yeah.
Definitely. So another question of mine, when you said 7-day party, were you talking about like you actually created a 7-man or 7-day virtual online Burning Man party, or were you talking about like the actual Burning Man?
it went, no, the online party went for 7 days, and there were
wow.
And actually, there was actually a 2-day after party, so actually technically it went for 9 days. What's cool, I mean, this actually happens at parties. Like if you go to a party for kind of, more than 12 hours, you do often you kind of lose sight of the existence of life, and life becomes party, and then you're in this immersive world. And that was sort of a state we got into, which is very, very interesting.
Okay. Yeah, I've actually been to Burning Man myself, so I'm curious what the online version would be like.
It was pretty epic, and like a lot of people did say that it was sort of quite comparable to the real thing, which is so difficult to imagine, because you're like, why? You're by yourself in your flat, but actually, human connection is not really about physical presence. It's about participation and attention and interaction.
Yeah, definitely. So somebody asked, when is the next Memrise party?
Well, we're doing a lot of these things kind of behind the scenes. There's actually one tonight, which I probably it's sort of somewhat ticketed, but yeah, and we're probably gonna scale them out over the next little while, and it'd be great for people to, if anyone's interested in coming, ping me on Twitter or email or whatever, and I'll make sure to let you know when there's a good one to come along to. So
can we find them on like a website, like Memrise website, or you just kind of tweet them out?
It's because we're doing them for specific subsets of language groups. There's not actually a super easy way to find them, but as we launch it more widely, there will be on the website and on our social media here.
Okay, cool. Another question came in. Do you think that parties need to be moderated?
Yeah, I mean, I think all social space needs to be curated and moderated. And so, just in the same way that you're moderating this. But a lot of that, I think, can happen through community. Because once certain kind of norms of, I've been very struck, for example, how on Clubhouse, which is actually an interesting language learning space, which we might talk about as well, there are certain norms of community and certain structural features of the product, which just means that you don't actually have to have a paid moderator or something in each room, but instead, and that's kind of what happened at Burning Man, where everything was co-created by the participants.
Yeah, totally. And so just kind of going off of that concept, how do you keep like a safe space within these parties?
Well, I think that part of it is that it's actually I rather pompously call this space-time architecture, but like if you can just click in somewhere like a YouTube live stream, you can, there's no sense of enclosure from the world. And there's no sense of the presence of others. But as soon as you have kind of a bouncer and an entrance experience, and you have to be dressed up, and you're kind of inculcated into the culture of the space and the party, that actually has a sort of strong normative effect on people's behavior. And and I think it's true. I mean, the same question goes for like, how do you get people to behave in a city or in a classroom or whatever else? It's just like, well, at some point, there are norms of human behavior which obtain, and in extreme circumstances, there's like the redress of the police and so on. But like the vast majority of the time, completely unnecessary.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we have time for a couple more questions here. How do you deal with certain elements that are very different on online parties versus real life, like noise interference when you start getting lots of mics on, etc.?
So, I mean, this is a kind of thing about product design. I mean, I think, you generally speaking, you have norms about sort of, I mean, with Zoom rooms and stuff, you can do settings where you turn microphone off as people come in, and in the same way that it's actually quite similar to at a dinner party. 12 people don't all normally talk at the same time as at a dinner party, and so there are all these kind of micro body languages and so on that cause one person to speak and one person not to. And I think it's such it's so interesting because sort of how just from a kind of a learning and cognitive science perspective, and just reiterating a point from the talk, I don't think any company has gone deeper than Memrise in sort of going right into the heart of the optimization of learning tech. But at some level, something which is completely accidental and unoptimized can actually have a superior effect on language learning. And that's actually because like the world has its own space repetition. Action in the world is inherently interactive. It's meaningful. It has all the principles we built into our learning tech kind of exist in the world. And so it's a wholly different way of thinking about how you structure a product. You allow these characteristics to emerge spontaneously rather than designing them in to the power of algorithm. Yeah,
totally. So going back to how your sofa mover learned via games in your description of a virtual online party platform, does the platform itself actually need to explicitly help with the language learning or just facilitate?
Extremely interesting question. So, I mean, the extremely interesting question. And so, like, the Call of Duty example is quite interesting. And someone was talking earlier actually about like, various tools, which kind of browser add-ons where you're like on the internet, and it'll be like you're reading The Guardian, and it'll be like El Football or whatever. I think there are advantages to. One of the things I've observed actually is that people which is why the classroom setup is not the optimal language learning unit, is that the actual amount of interaction you want to have as a language learner, it weighs immersion much more strongly than communication. So it's actually super exhausting as a language learner to be talking the whole time. And so like an hour lesson or even a half-hour lesson one-on-one is quite exhausting. And the natural pace at which people like to speak is more like 3% or 5% of the time. And so there's an awful lot of time in healthy immersion in kind of language, which is more like watching someone do some cooking or doing a dance lesson or what have you. And so I think that kind of culturally immersive stuff is where the magic lies, and that is like, you probably know you're like learning a language, but it's not like here's how the subjunctive works in German or whatever. It's more like, oh cool, I would have cooked these sausages for longer, and now I'm getting exposed to that thing, which is pretty much what Krashen recommends, right? With the natural approach to language learning. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again. Some people are asking if you can maybe drop in the chat your Twitter and email so that they can get on these party lists. And yeah, if you want to stick around for a little bit afterwards, I'm sure some people have more questions for you in the chat. That would be awesome.
Sure thing.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And yeah, we'll be back in a moment with the very last panel.
Great. Thank you.